Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing a video that kind of relates to a video I did recently. I did the best books I've read according to Goodreads, and I told you guys that I wanted to do the worst books I've read according to Goodreads and whether or not I agree with whether or not they were not great books. Now I have no idea what books are going to come up for this. I have no idea like at all what books are considered really bad books on Goodreads, so I'm really interested to see kind of like if I agree with these or not. And I really enjoy doing my other one as well, so I'm super curious to see like what the worst books that I've read are according to Goodreads. It's just interesting to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to my shelves. Okay, you guys, so the first book doesn't surprise me at all, okay? And there's a few reasons for this. And it is Adultolescence by Gabby Hanna. Now, this is a poetry collection by the YouTuber Gabby Hanna, and I feel like Gabby got a lot of hate on this book, which I think was sort of unfounded. I think people were meaner than they needed to be about this book. Like, in my opinion, it wasn't as bad as people made it out to seem. Like, I've seen some really mean videos about this book and I'm like, dude, chill. Like, it's just some poetry, you know? And I feel like this book really works well for people that are huge fans of Gabby Hanna. It wasn't like the most profound poetry that I'd ever read, but it was like fine. Like, it was one of those really easy to read books, probably good for like preteens, teens, you know? But I think part of the reason why this has such low ratings is because of the amount of like kind of hate videos. I mean, she has a lot of fans, but she also has a lot of people that really hate on her, which is sad and mean. But I think that probably affected the rating a little bit, but it is the average rating of 3.09, so I gave it 2 stars. The next book is another one that I really didn't like as well. It's called Bottled by Chris Gooch. This was a graphic novel, and this book was so, like, I literally have almost forgotten about what this is even about. This is like a story about like adulthood, but extremely plotless. It's kind of like the monotony of being an adult from what I remember. This book was so boring, such like a waste of time and paper. Like, I just feel like the story was just not compelling at all. 3.10. So not very much higher than Gabby Hanna's book. I gave it 2 stars. It was just one of those books, like, I literally don't even remember what the story was about. I think there was like a mystery in it, but like at the same time, like, I don't even remember. Okay, so the next one is another graphic novel that I also gave 2 stars, and it is I, Parrot, average rating 3.15. And in my review I said, one of those books that is trying really hard to be deep and profound but just doesn't hit the mark. Also, that ending, such a bad decision on so many levels. So this book was about like a mom. It was like a motherhood story, but it was like one of those books that was like trying to be really profound and metaphorical, but you're just like, sometimes that doesn't work if the metaphor isn't exactly the same thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes metaphors can work really well, but like other times, if you don't hit that metaphorical mark perfectly, sometimes it's like, no, but they're not the same thing. And I feel like that's kind of what this book did. So that's kind of where I feel like this book went wrong a little bit, and this has a average rating of 3.15. So the next book is another graphic novel. What is with graphic novels? So this one I actually don't agree with. This has the average rating of 3.45. And now I think the reason why this one has a lower rating is because not very many people have rated it. Only 62 people have read this book. And so I feel like if you have not very many people that read your book, but then you get kind of a decent amount of lower ratings, then it's really going to affect your like average rating. And I feel like this book is one of those books that was good, I think. And it is Heartbeat Volume 1 by Maria Lovett. And this was like a interesting, like kind of dark academia, vampire-y type of novel, and it was kind of about this girl that was highly bullied, and she kind of wanted to get revenge on the people that were mean to her. And so what she ended up doing was falling in love with this kind of weird kid, but he kind of turned out to be like a vampire, but she was like fine with it because she just wanted to like be bad so she could get back at her bullies, kind of. And I honestly liked this book. There was actually some smut in it, which I've never read smut in a graphic novel before, but I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was actually really good. I would totally read this graphic novel again, and I've been waiting so patiently for the next volume to come out because I really want to read it. So this is one that I don't agree with. I thought that this was a great graphic novel, and yeah, I don't think it deserves a 3.45 rating. So the next book is this book that I read ages ago, probably in like 2010 or something like that, and this is called The Bitch Posse by Martha O'Connor. To be honest, I don't remember this book at all. Like, at all. It's been so long since I've read it. It's kind of, I think, like a Pretty Little Liars type of thing. That's kind of, I think, the best way to describe it, but that's me trying to explain it, like literally, I'm not even kidding, like 15 years after I read it. I don't remember hardly anything, but I think this group of girls in high school committed a murder from what I remember, and then they were trying to keep a secret, but then they all kind of get together in adulthood, and like, I don't know. It's kind of like one of those weird Pretty Little Liars type of situations. I don't remember it enough to agree or not agree, but I gave it a 3-star. The next book is another book that I agree with. So this is Perfect Little Children by Sophie Hannah, and this is a 3.47. So I gave this book 3 stars. This book honestly could have been good, but this is one of those books where you're like, I wish that this book ended differently. Like, I feel like this could have been a really cool book if the author could have like come up with like a really unique ending to make this book like really weird, but the ending was like not what I wanted out of this book. It's basically about this girl that lives at this house, and she saw her neighbor lady who was a mom. She had 2 kids, like a boy and a girl. They were about like, I don't know, 6 and 8 years old. And then she moved away, and then she came back like 10 years later, and she saw her neighbor lady again, and she still had her same exact kids, and they were still like 6 and 8 years old. They had not grown at all. And it's kind of her trying to piece together like what is going on in that situation. And I was really hoping for something weird and sci-fi and crazy, but the ending was extremely lackluster, and it's not what I wanted. It was basically like a really good explanation for like some real life thing. I don't know. It was just not what I wanted out of the book. And this author was extremely descriptive in her writing, and it was super unnecessary because it's a thriller. Like, we don't need to know all the details of how something looked. And it was just not my favorite writing style. I just wish that this book was so much more than it was. The next book is another book I agree with. I actually agree with a lot of these. Wilder Girls by Rory Power. And this has a 3.49 rating, and I gave it a 2 stars. So this book, I feel like everyone was excited about when this first came out. It was like, ooh, look at this cover. Like, it was super, super gorgeous, and so many people were so excited to read this, but so many people were disappointed. Like, I don't think I've really seen too many people give this book a very high rating. I think one person, and it was Books with Lala, gave this book a high rating, and I think the reason she liked this is because she really likes speculative fiction. She really likes kind of open endings. That's totally her style of reading, and that's definitely what this book was. But for the most part, I haven't seen like any good reviews on it. I actually just donated it, you guys saw in my last unhaul video, and it just wasn't that great of a book, honestly, and there was a ton of plot holes in it as well. The next book is a 3.49 rating, which is the same as Wilder Girls, actually, which is surprising because this book was way worse than Wilder Girls, and it's The Bachelor's Cat by Lynn Hoffman. I have gone off so hard on this book. This is the worst book I have ever read in my entire life. Like, easily. I gave it 1 star, and I rarely give books 1 star. This book was so horribly mean. Like, you know when like you can be like, oh, this book is problematic, but it's just the book, or like just the characters are kind of problematic, but like they're kind of supposed to be. This is one of those books that is extremely problematic because the author is problematic. Like, the way that the author writes some of these things, you're like, you did not just say that. Like, only a problematic person that's like a bad human being could write that, because nobody would actually write that because that's just mean to say about somebody, right? It's body shaming is basically what this book is. That's the overall gist of this book. It's just a big giant book of body shaming. It was so bad. Like, I don't want to go too deep into it, but you can read my review on Goodreads if you kind of want to know. But it's just a bad book. Do not read it. Horrible, horrible, horrible. The next bad book is 3.51, and it is Bring Me Back by B.A. Paris, and I gave it 2 stars, so I obviously agree as well. So this book was just plot hole filled. I feel like it wasn't a realistic book. I feel like there were so many things about it where I'm like, that would not happen. Like, are you kidding me? Sometimes twists don't make sense. If it's like not realistic, it really, really gets on my nerves, and I feel like the twist in this book to me didn't feel realistic, like it could really actually happen in real life, which bothers me. I also kind of feel like this book got really repetitive, which is pretty common with B.A. Paris's writing, but this was really, really repetitive. I kind of feel like she stuck with the same theme throughout the whole entire book, to the point where you're like, after it happens for like the 7th time, you're like, okay, I'm bored. Like, can we do something different? Next up is All Your Twisted Secrets by Diana Urban, and I gave it 2 stars. I agree with almost all of these, which is crazy. This is a 3.51, and I gave it 2. Like I said. So this book was just an okay concept, had very Breakfast Club vibes. It's about this group of kids that get stuck in this like library or something, and there's basically a note that says you need to decide one person out of your group to die, and if you can't decide which one of you guys are gonna die, then a bomb is gonna go off and all of you are gonna die. So they have to decide who's gonna die. Great concept. I thought that sounded super, super interesting, but honestly, this book was super dumb. I don't know, it was just weird how this came together, because you're like, are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? Like, you would really do that? I don't know, it was just weird. And then like the way that the characters dealt with this really traumatizing experience at the end was like so weird, and just like they were like, whatever, like it felt very like they weren't traumatized at all by this. Obviously, to make a story like this work, like you have to kind of know what their relationships are and how they're tied together, so there was a lot of like time jumping to the past and like reading all these drama-filled moments of their past together, and I hate that kind of thing. So this book honestly was super, super boring. It didn't deliver, you know? The next one is The Honey Don't List by Christina Lauren, and I gave this 2 stars, and it is an average rating of 3.52. This was the most boring romance I've ever read in my life. This book was so boring, and ever since I read this book, I haven't wanted to read a Christina Lauren book since. Like, I just feel like in the back of my head, I'm like, do I really even like Christina Lauren? Like, that book was so boring. And I'm afraid to read another Christina Lauren because it was just such a bland book. I felt no connection with these characters. I hated 2 of the characters in this book. Like, they were so unlikable, and like, this hands down has to be probably the worst romance I've ever read. And I've read a lot of romance. So, okay, so this one I really don't agree with. Winter Song by S.J. Jones. This is a 3.54 average rating, and I gave it 5 stars. I loved this book when I read it. This book is a labyrinth retelling, but it's not really like a retelling. I wouldn't say it's like super, super based on the story, but it has like the Goblin King in it, and she kind of pulls from like the movie a little bit. But this was super satisfying to me. Now, I think the reason I liked this so much is because it was the first fantasy romance that I had ever read. And I never read fantasy before that because I didn't think I would like it, but then somebody recommended this book to me and I read it, and I was blown away at how much I loved fantasy romance. And it was the first one that I'd ever read, and so I think that had something to do with the fact that I liked it so much at the time. I probably wouldn't like it as much now as I did then, and I think it's just one of those things. Like, it was the first in the genre for me. Next up is Those Who Pray by Jennifer Moffat. So this is a 3.54. I gave it a 4 star. I thought this book was decent. Like, I don't think it was horrible. This book only has 15 or about 1,600 ratings, but I don't think this book was that bad. I think it did a really good job at kind of explaining why somebody might join a cult or fall into a cult and how somebody will work themselves out of it. I thought it was really, really well done in that regard, like how loneliness could really drive you into joining a cult on accident, and I think that the author did a great job with that. I gave it a 4, but I could see how somebody might give it like a 3.5. So I would say it's pretty accurate, actually. That's a pretty accurate rating. Next up is Fierce Kingdom by Jen Phillips. This is a thriller book. Now, I can understand why this book has a lower rating for a thriller. It's 3.55, and I give it 4 stars. Now, the reason I personally liked this book more than the average is because this is a very good thriller for a mom, especially a mom of like a toddler, 3-4-year-old child. It's basically about a girl that gets stuck in a zoo with 2 like mass shooters, and the woman has to basically hide in this zoo. She has to kind of protect her child, but it's really hard sometimes when you have a child and having to stay quiet because like you have a child and they don't understand. And it's kind of like what you would do in the situation with a child, and how like a mother will do anything to protect her child. And I feel like the reason why I like this book so much is because I am a mom, and I think I read this book at a time when Emery was about the age as the kid in this book, and she did such a good job at just explaining and describing what this experience would be like as a mom. It's amazing. but I feel like you wouldn't have that connection if you weren't a mom, if you know what I mean. So I can understand why some people would be like, it was okay, but a mom would be like, oh yeah, this is like really good because it's spot on. So Snot Girl, 3.56, I gave it a 3. I agree, Snot Girl was like mediocre. Shadow Song, the second book in the Winter Song duology, hated that book with a passion. It has a 3.56. I gave it a 2 star, so I disagree. I think it was worse than the average rating. And then I'm gonna do one more, Strange Grace by Tessa Gratton. This was a 2 star for me, and it has a 3.56 rating. And honestly, I just remember this book being so boring. I remember this book just doing absolutely nothing for me. It has kind of like a polyamorous vibe to it a little bit, but I just remember this book being so bland. Like there was nothing about it that was drawing me to the story. I was not interested in it like at all. And it just wasn't at all for me. For the most part, it's just a bland book altogether, and that's kind of why it has a lower rating. And I think it was worse than the average rating, so that's just my opinion. So that is it, you guys, for this video. I could go on and on and on with these types of videos, but I don't want to make this video too long, but those are some of the worst books that I've read according to Goodreads, and obviously I have agreed with a lot of them. So I feel like I agree more with this video, or these books, than I did with my best books that I read according to Goodreads. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a fabulous day, and I will talk to you guys soon.